Vikings Valhalla hopes to capture what audiences loved about the original series, but is it off to a strong enough start to truly hook me at this point? Stick around and I'll share my thoughts. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Vikings Valhalla, the premiere, episodes 1 and 2. The synopsis on IMDb reads, follow-up series to Vikings set 100 years afterward and centering on the adventures of Leif Erikson, Freydis, and Harold Hardrada, and the Norman king William the Conqueror. The synopsis for episode 1 reads, plotting to avenge a massacre in England, Viking armies converge in Kattegat. But I love their accents. But siblings Leif and Freydis exact a different kind of retribution. And the episode 2 synopsis reads, to save the life of Freydis, Leif agrees to join Canute and Harold's siege of London. Queen Emma dispatches stepson Edmund to secure an ally's help. So, what is this basic animal? I mean, if you've seen the original Vikings series, which I eventually did watch through to the end, you're getting something very similar here. It's made by the same creator of that series, although instead of being on the History Channel or Amazon, as it eventually was, I think, now it's a Netflix production. It's a production style very similar to the original series. You know, it's got that drab, dreary coloring that fits the rain and the serious tone. But so far it's lacking in these first 2 episodes the mystical elements, where you would characters would like see visions of the god that they worshipped. Most of the time that was Viking gods, but there was a character in the first 1 or 2 seasons of Vikings that was seeing images of Christ and different things like that were left up to the viewer's interpretation to think to themselves, okay, are they actually seeing something? Is this show saying that these supernatural elements are real, or is this just something that their fervent belief has kind of conjured up in their minds, or is there something supernatural at play? You know, there was a lot that it was done in a stylized way that allowed, I think, the viewer to interpret these things the way they wanted, but nevertheless injected into the show a sense of the mystical or even the fantastical. And so I do miss those elements because I'm really not into historical drama. I like... as a geek, I like a little bit of geeky stuff injected in there. And so that was something that really helped hook me into that original Viking series. So far, it doesn't look like we're going to see that in this series, but hopefully that's just a fluke of the first 2 episodes, because I really did like that stylistic element. Let's see here. The religion, though, is still very near the center of the drama, as we've got 100 years later a whole bunch of Vikings that are Christians, or nominally Christians anyway. I mean, I think there's a very distorted version of Christianity that they are following, which was very, very common at this time. And then they're fighting with the traditional Vikings who still worship the Norse gods. And so those tensions create much of the drama in this setting. Even so, while religion is often a catalyst, the story really centers largely on characters and the hard choices they make, as well as the risks that they take and the prices they pay to achieve their goals. And so while these religious elements are a very strong backdrop, ultimately, you could be inserting other things that these characters care very passionately about that separate them from other people, and the drama, I think, would still feel the same. So it's still very character-oriented, and, you know, I think that the actual backdrop doesn't like help or take away from, you know, that character drama. The story also frequently has action, or more accurately, violence. Things are clearly heading toward large battles, but not much of that yet in the first 2 episodes. Instead, there are repeated instances of one-on-one combat or sudden brutal acts of revenge. So it definitely portrays the savageness, I think, that was much more common in this time period than at least in, you know, Western culture today. In general, I think if you liked the ingredients of the original Vikings series, you're likely to find things that pull you in to Vikings Valhalla as well. As far as cast and performances go, you know, all the performances felt solid to me so far, but without any standouts yet. The strongest performances, I suspect, will will come later when characters are more developed and defined. But this does seem like a really solid cast to start with, and a bunch of faces I don't recognize, which I also really appreciate, so that doesn't take me out of the story too much. As far as the stunts and the visuals go, it's on the same level, I think, with the previous series. For me, I think the setting might be the biggest selling point here. This time and place in history is also the aesthetic foundation for many fantasy worlds, many D&D inspired fantasy worlds. So on that level, it has real geek appeal, I think, for me, and probably will for a lot of other geeks too. And it left me wanting to play Assassin's Creed Valhalla today, which I just started playing a couple months ago. In addition to the great sets, props, and costumes, the sound design also creates atmosphere, with the creaking wood of the boats, the creaking leather of their armor, and a variety of other kind of earthy sounds that you would expect. While the story and performances haven't yet made this must-watch content for me, the setting and the way that they execute in presenting the setting will probably bring me back for at least a couple more episodes, by which point the other elements will hopefully get their hooks into me when given more of a chance. As far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought and conversation? Well, you can already guess I'm going to say yes, of course. Now, in looking at the themes here and in shows like this or stories like this, historical accuracy is not much of a consideration for me. Someone might say, well, if I make a comment about how people are being portrayed or groups are being portrayed and stuff, somebody could say, well, that's just because that's what was going on in history at that time. For all I know, they are representing history accurately in every respect, but every script still has a focus that the writer chooses. And so for that reason, I am, still not surprised, but still a little bummed as a Christian and really bored as a fan of story that once again a story is drawing from the well of evil, hypocritical Christians or those claiming to be Christians doing terrible things in the name of Jesus. Some Vikings are also portrayed negatively, and by Vikings I mean traditional Vikings who worship the Norse gods. Some of them are also portrayed negatively, but the Viking religion and its followers are represented far more sympathetically by comparison, and not a single professing Christian in the story at any time voiced an alternate, actually freaking biblical view on Christian teaching. Again, I understand that was very scarce at that time, and it was not the dominant kind of like movement at the time in Christianity. But hopefully a character like that will emerge deeper into the season or the series. Still, I'm not holding my breath in anticipation of that happening. Unsurprisingly, the ideas given positive representation in these episodes are about trusting your own instincts and trusting your own abilities. These are admirable qualities, with a possible dash of can't we all just embrace relativism in order to get along? Although I may be reading too deeply into the moments where that seemed to be surfacing a bit for me. That said, I think it's important as Christians that we not get angry at the fairly one-sided representation of Christians in fiction, but instead realize that for whatever reasons or motives, these representations of Christians and Christianity are not going anywhere. We ought not be outraged and shocked that this is happening. This is just the nature of the world, Jesus told us to expect this. So I think instead we should embrace the challenge and the responsibility as the global body of Christ to represent the love of Jesus along with truth so effectively that eventually even non-Christians will increasingly see these representational trends as out of proportion, given their own repeatedly positive experiences with the Christians they know, those Christians being you and me. So I think that ought to be kind of where we focus our energy and attention in looking at the people in our lives, the people we interact with online and offline, and bringing truth, of course, without compromising on that, but in equal portion, bringing love and sensitivity and compassion, so that people that interact with us come away maybe surprised at, wow, I was expecting a very different kind of interaction with a Christian, and that being a very positive interaction that they had. That's, I think, the task that we have in front of us in reaction to the kinds of representations of Christianity that we typically see in fiction. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in TV shows, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, give this a try. And no rush on this one. I mean, gosh, if it never strikes you to check it out before then, maybe even wait a few years for the whole series to be done and prove that it won't get canceled on a cliffhanger, and then, check it out. But whenever you want some of that pseudo-fantasy setting and more of what you liked about the original series, Vikings Valhalla is at least worth checking out. It's rated TV MA for violence, sexuality, and nudity. No real nudity that I noticed. I mean, there was a brief flash, not really close up of a butt crack, but there was an absence of nudity when it could have really been easy to include it. It almost seemed like, boy, they're kind of going out of their way to keep their clothes on in this scene. That's interesting. So sexuality definitely strongly there, but nudity surprisingly not, when in other shows they would have just totally had all their clothes off. So I'm hopeful that it will be as relatively, quote-unquote, modest, quote-unquote, by streaming TV standards, as the original series was, I thought. And those are all of my thoughts for now on Vikings Valhalla, episodes 1 and 2. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spiritblade Insiders for making this and so much of my review content possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/Spiritblade Productions. Then I hope you'll check out our podcast, the Christian Geek Central podcast, and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Summer insanity.
Liberate butter.